Welcome to Mystic Sleep Tales, a channel featuring timeless stories, gentle narration, and calming atmospheres to help you fall asleep. Before we begin tonight's story, I'd love to know where you heard it from. Please share in the comments below. It's always wonderful to see our small community spreading across the globe. Now it's time to relax. Settle into your bed or your favorite armchair. Close your eyes. Take slow, deep breaths and let the day's fatigue wash away. Let my voice gently carry you to sleep, a place where imagination flows and dreams begin. Imagine, if you will, that the year is 1874. The month is November, and the evening has come down early, as November evenings do in England, drawing its curtain of indigo and charcoal across the sky well before supper has been cleared away. In a certain quarter of a certain town, not far from a railway goods yard where the day's work has long since concluded, there stands a modest building of red brick, with a slate roof and a single chimney from which a thin line of smoke rises, almost invisibly, into the darkness above. This building is a coal merchant's office. It is not grand. It is not large. It sits beside a yard where, by day, great heaps of coal are measured and weighed and loaded onto carts for delivery to the homes and businesses of the surrounding streets. During the hours of daylight, the yard is a place of considerable activity, with horses stamping in their harness, and men calling to one another across the black mountains of fuel, and the sound of shovels biting into loose coal, and the rumble of iron-rimmed wheels upon the cobblestones. But now, at this late hour, the yard is still. The horses have been led back to the stable. The carts stand empty beneath a lean-to shelter, their shafts resting upon the ground. The great heaps of coal, the wall's end and the household best, sit dark and silent under the open sky, and the only sound from the yard is the occasional drip of water from the eaves of the shelter, where a thin November mist has begun to gather. Inside the office, however, there is warmth and light, and a small, particular kind of comfort that belongs entirely to rooms where work is done quietly and without interruption. The office is a single room, perhaps 12 feet by 15, with walls of plastered brick that were once painted a pale cream but have, over the years, taken on a faint amber tint from the coal fire and the gas lamp that provide its illumination. The floor is of plain deal boards, darkened by age and by the tread of boots that have carried in the fine black dust of the yard, though a threadbare rug of no particular color lies before the fireplace and softens the sound of footsteps in that small area. There is a window in the wall that faces the yard, but at this hour the shutters have been drawn and fastened with a simple iron hook, and the heavy curtain, a dark green thing of some coarse material, has been pulled across them so that no draught may enter. Along the far wall stands a row of tall shelves, and upon these shelves are arranged the ledgers of the business, bound in leather of varying shades of brown, their spines marked with the years they contain in faded gilt lettering. Some of these ledgers are thick with years of entries, their pages fat and slightly warped from the weight of ink they have absorbed. Others are slender, belonging to quieter periods when the trade was lighter. Together they form a kind of history, not of kings and battles and great events, but of tonnage and price and delivery, of accounts received and accounts outstanding, of the simple and necessary commerce that keeps a household warm through an English winter. Beneath the shelves, pushed against the wall, is a cabinet of dark oak with brass handles, in which are kept the bills and receipts and correspondence of the current quarter. Beside it, on a small table of its own, sits a set of brass scales, used for weighing the occasional small sample of coal that a customer may wish to inspect before placing a larger order. The scales are beautifully made, with a slender beam and two round pans that gleam dully in the firelight, and they have a quality of patience about them, as if they have been waiting all evening for someone to set a task upon their pans and are perfectly content to go on waiting. In the center of the room, positioned so that it may benefit both from the warmth of the fire and from the light of the gas bracket mounted upon the wall above, stands the clerk's desk. It is a high desk, of the sort at which a man might stand or perch upon a tall stool, with a sloping surface of worn leather upon which a ledger may be opened and consulted with ease. The desk is old and has been well used. Its surface bears the impressions of 1,000 entries, faint grooves where the nib of a pen has pressed a little too firmly through the paper beneath it, and there are small stains of ink here and there, some blue, some black, that have accumulated over the years into an accidental pattern resembling a map of some unknown country. Upon the desk, arranged with the particular neatness that belongs to a man who takes pride in the orderliness of his work, are the tools of the clerk's trade. There is the inkstand, a solid brass affair with a glass well set into its center, filled with ink so dark it appears almost purple in the gaslight. Beside it lies a steel-nibbed pen, its handle of turned ebony, resting in a groove cut into the wood of the desk for precisely this purpose. There is a small dish of fine sand, used for blotting, though a square of blotting paper also lies close at hand, its surface already decorated with the reverse ghosts of the evening's figures. There is a ruler, a penknife for trimming the occasional rough edge of paper, and a small brass tray upon which rest several pencils, sharpened to a fine point and arranged in a row like soldiers standing at attention. And there, seated upon the tall stool before this desk, is the clerk himself. He is a man of no very remarkable appearance, neither young nor old, dressed in a dark coat of plain broadcloth and a waistcoat of grey wool, with a white shirt beneath whose collar has been loosened slightly in the warmth of the room. His hair is of a middling brown, somewhat thinned at the crown, and his face, illuminated by the steady glow of the gas bracket above him, wears an expression of quiet concentration, the look of a man engaged in work that is neither difficult nor tedious, but that requires a steady hand and a clear eye and a gentle, unhurried attention to detail. Earlier this evening, before he settled to his work, he took a moment to brush the coal dust from the sleeves and shoulders of his coat, using a small whisk brush that he keeps hanging from a nail beside the door. It is a ritual he performs each evening, this quiet act of tidying, and there is something both practical and meditative in it, the slow sweep of the bristles across the dark cloth, the fine black particles falling away and dispersing into the air. Coal dust is the constant companion of anyone who works in the coal trade. It finds its way into every crease and fold, settles upon every surface, and gives to the air of the office a faint, mineral smell that is not unpleasant, a smell of the deep earth, of ancient forests compressed by unimaginable weight into something dense and combustible and warm. Now, with his coat brushed and his stool drawn up to the desk, the clerk opens the large ledger that has been waiting for him all day. It is the accounts ledger for the month of November, bound in a leather the color of dark treacle, and when he opens it the pages fall apart naturally to the place where he left off yesterday evening, held by a thin ribbon of silk that serves as a bookmark. The pages are ruled with pale blue lines, both horizontal and vertical, creating a grid of small rectangles into which figures are to be entered. At the top of each column is a heading written in the clerk's own careful hand. Date, customer, quantity, grade, price, amount due, amount received, balance. He takes up his pen. He dips the nib into the ink, turning it slightly so that both sides of the point are evenly charged, and then he touches the nib briefly to the lip of the glass well to remove the excess. This is a motion he has performed 10,000 times, and it is so deeply habitual that he does it without thought, the way a musician might draw a bow across a string without consciously considering the angle or the pressure. The result is a nib that is perfectly loaded, ready to produce a line of ink that is neither too thick nor too thin, that flows evenly and does not blot. He begins to write. The pen moves across the page in slow, deliberate strokes, forming the figures with a clarity and a neatness that speak of long practice. Each number is distinct, each decimal point precisely placed, each column aligned with the columns above and below it so that the eye may travel down the page without confusion. He is copying entries from a smaller daybook that lies open beside the ledger, transferring the record of the day's transactions into the more permanent and comprehensive volume. It is quiet, careful work, and it produces a quiet, careful sound, the faint scratch of the nib against the paper, a sound so soft that it can only be heard because there is so little else to hear. From time to time, the clerk pauses. He lifts the pen from the page and holds it just above the surface, the nib hovering over the paper like a bird that has paused in its flight to survey the ground below. In these moments of stillness he is reading ahead in the daybook, confirming the next entry, checking a figure or a name before committing it to the permanence of the ledger. Then the pen descends again, and the quiet scratching resumes, and another line of figures takes its place upon the page. Outside, beyond the shuttered window, the world has grown very still. The distant sound of cart wheels that could be heard earlier in the evening, the rumble and clatter of late deliveries making their way through the neighboring streets, has faded entirely now. Somewhere, far off, a church clock strikes the 3/4 hour, its chime muffled by the mist so that it arrives at the ear not as a clear note but as a soft, blurred pulse of sound, like a stone dropped into deep water. The clock's voice is a gentle reminder that time is passing, that the evening is deepening toward night, but it carries no urgency. Time here, in this small warm room, has its own pace, and that pace is set not by the clock but by the steady rhythm of the pen upon the paper, by the slow consumption of the coal in the grate, by the measured breathing of the man upon the stool. The fire in the grate is a coal fire, as befits the office of a coal merchant, and it burns with the particular character that belongs to coal and to no other fuel. It does not leap and dance as a wood fire does, nor does it crackle and snap with the volatile energies of dry timber. Instead, it glows. The coals, which were fed fresh into the grate an hour or so ago, have passed through their first phase of smoking and flaming and have settled now into a deep, radiant heat that seems to come not from the surface of the coals but from somewhere within them, as if each lump of black fuel contained a tiny furnace of its own. The colors of the fire are extraordinary in their subtlety. At the heart of the grate, where the coals are most thickly banked, there is a glow of deep orange, almost red, that pulses very faintly with each slight change in the draught. Around this central intensity, the colors shade outward through amber and gold to a pale, ashy gray at the edges, where the fuel has burned longest and is beginning to crumble into the fine white powder that will, in the morning, be shoveled out and carried away. Along the underside of the coals, where the air reaches them through the bars of the grate, there are thin lines of brilliant blue flame, delicate as the veins of a leaf, that appear and disappear and appear again with a hypnotic unpredictability. The warmth from this fire fills the room gently and completely, the way water fills a vessel, finding every corner and settling into every hollow. It is not the fierce, dry heat of a large blaze but a softer, more constant warmth that seems to have become part of the room itself, as if the plaster of the walls and the wood of the floor and the leather of the desk have all absorbed it and are now giving it back, slowly and steadily, like the warmth of a hand held against one's cheek. The cast iron surround of the fireplace, with its simple pattern of scrollwork and its arched opening, radiates a particular warmth of its own, and the fender of polished brass that borders the hearth catches the glow of the coals and holds it, so that there is a small pool of golden light upon the floor before the fire that seems almost liquid in its softness. Beside the fireplace, upon the floor, stands a coal scuttle of Japan tin, filled with fresh coal for the evening. Its contents are a miniature version of the great heaps in the yard outside, dark and angular and faintly lustrous where the light catches the flat planes of the broken coal. A small brass shovel, its handle worn smooth by use, rests against the rim of the scuttle, ready for the next time the fire needs tending, though that moment is still some time away. On the mantelpiece above the fire, which is a plain shelf of painted wood with a simple moulding along its front edge, there stand a few objects that have found their permanent home in this room. There is a clock, a small mantel clock with a round face and Roman numerals, its brass case dulled to a soft gold by the atmosphere of the office. The clock ticks with a patient, unhurried rhythm, each tick arriving at exactly the same interval as the last, a sound so regular and so constant that it has long since ceased to be heard by the clerk, who is so accustomed to it that its absence would be more noticeable than its presence. Beside the clock is a tin of tobacco, its lid decorated with a printed label that has faded to near illegibility, and beside that is a short clay pipe, its bowl blackened by use, that belongs to the merchant himself and is left here at the end of each working day as other men might leave a hat upon a hook. There is also a small pottery jug of no particular beauty, in which a quantity of spills are kept, thin tapers of twisted paper used for lighting the pipe or, if necessary, for carrying flame from the fire to the gas bracket on those rare occasions when the lamp goes out. The gas bracket itself is mounted on the wall above and slightly to the left of the desk, positioned so that its light falls directly upon the page of the open ledger. It is a simple fitting, a curved arm of brass emerging from a circular plate on the wall, terminating in an upturned burner over which sits a glass globe of frosted white. The gas flame within this globe burns with a steady, slightly yellowish light, not bright by modern standards, but sufficient for the close work of writing, and possessed of a quality of warmth and intimacy that the harsher light of later technologies would never quite achieve. The flame makes a very faint hissing sound, barely audible, a continuous thread of soft noise that blends with the ticking of the clock and the scratching of the pen and the gentle settling of the coals into a kind of music, if music is the right word for something so quiet and so uninsistent. The clerk works on. He has reached a section of the daybook that records a series of deliveries made that morning to the households along Clarence Street, a respectable row of terraced houses whose occupants are reliable customers, placing their orders for household coal with a regularity that makes them among the easier entries to record. Each delivery is for a similar quantity, 1 or 2 hundredweight of the best household grade, and the price is the same for each, so that the work of copying these entries into the ledger becomes almost rhythmic, the pen moving in the same pattern again and again, the same figures appearing with the minor variations of name and house number that distinguish one customer from another. There is something deeply soothing in this repetition. It is the soothing quality of all ordered, purposeful work performed at a gentle pace, work that occupies the hands and the surface of the mind while leaving the deeper faculties at rest. The clerk does not think about the figures as he copies them. He does not calculate or analyze or wonder about the customers whose names he writes. He simply transcribes, faithfully and neatly, and in doing so he enters a state of quiet absorption that is very near to peace. The pen moves. The ink flows. The figures appear upon the page, one after another, in their orderly columns, and the page fills slowly, the way a field fills with snow, each entry settling into its appointed place as gently and as inevitably as a flake of snow settles upon the ground. And the fire glows, and the clock ticks, and the gas lamp hisses its tiny hiss, and outside the mist thickens over the silent yard, and the evening deepens, and everything is still. After a time, the clerk reaches the bottom of the page. He lifts the pen and sets it down in its groove, and he reaches across the desk to the small dish of sand and sprinkles a pinch of the fine grains across the wet ink of the most recent entries, tilting the page slightly so that the sand distributes itself evenly. Then he waits, allowing a few moments for the ink to dry, and during this brief pause he straightens his back, rolls his shoulders gently, and turns his head to look at the fire. The coals have settled a little further since he last looked. The arrangement within the grate has shifted, imperceptibly, as the burned portions crumble and the unburned portions find new positions, and the pattern of light and shadow upon the hearth has changed accordingly. Where before there was a ridge of bright orange, there is now a gentle slope of amber, and where a thin blue flame once flickered there is a new one, in a slightly different place, performing the same silent dance. The clerk watches the fire for a moment, not thinking, not planning, simply looking, and the firelight plays upon his face and gives it a softness, a gentleness, that it. The daybook beside the ledger tells him that the next group of entries concerns the deliveries made to the commercial accounts, the bakeries and the laundries and the small manufactories that rely upon the coal merchant for their fuel. These entries are somewhat more varied than the household deliveries, involving different grades of coal and different quantities and different terms of payment, so that the clerk must pay a slightly closer attention to his work, reading each entry in the daybook with care before transferring it to the ledger. But the pace does not quicken. The pen does not move faster. If anything, the additional attention required has the effect of deepening the clerk's absorption, drawing him more fully into the quiet, contemplative state that the work induces, so that the world beyond the desk and the ledger and the small circle of gaslight recedes even further, becoming less real, less present, less important than the figures taking shape beneath the nib. There is a particular entry that gives him a moment's pause. It concerns a delivery of 3 tons of Wallsend coal to a brewery on the far side of town, and the daybook records that the delivery was made in 2 loads rather than 1. Because the brewer's yard was too narrow to accommodate the full cart. The clerk must note this in the ledger, not because it affects the price or the quantity, but because it is a detail of the transaction that the merchant will wish to have recorded, and because the second load, arriving later in the day, was received and signed for by a different person than the first. So the clerk writes a small annotation in the margin of the ledger, in a hand even smaller and more precise than his usual script, explaining the circumstances of the split delivery, and then he continues with the figures, and the moment of extra attention passes, and the rhythm of the work resumes. The clock on the mantelpiece, which has been ticking all this while with its quiet, mechanical patience, now begins to chime the hour. The sound is not loud, a small, silver-toned bell struck by a tiny hammer within the clock's case, but in the deep silence of the room it carries a certain authority, a gentle announcement that time has turned another corner. The clerk does not count the chimes. He knows, without needing to look up, what hour it is, for the progress of his work through the daybook tells him as surely as any clock how far the evening has advanced. But the chimes are pleasant to hear, a brief melody of identical notes falling one upon another like drops of water into a still basin, and when they cease the silence that follows seems even deeper than before, as if the room has drawn a fresh breath and is holding it, savoring the quiet. The fire needs tending now. The clerk can tell by the quality of the light it is casting, which has shifted from the deep orange of vigorous burning to a paler, more diffuse glow that speaks of coals nearing the end of their useful life. He sets down his pen once more and slides from the stool, his feet touching the floor with a soft sound, and he crosses the few paces to the fireplace. He takes up the small brass shovel from the coal scuttle and lifts several lumps of fresh coal, holding the shovel low and steady so that no fragments may fall upon the rug. With a slow, careful motion he tips the coal onto the fire, placing each lump precisely so that air may still circulate between and beneath them, and the fresh coal lands upon the glowing bed with a series of soft, dense sounds, quiet impacts that are absorbed by the heat and the silence. For a moment the fire seems to dim as the new coal smothers the glow of the old, and a thin wisp of pale smoke rises from the grate, carrying with it that unmistakable mineral scent, the smell of coal giving up its first moisture and its surface gases before settling into its long, steady burn. Then, gradually, the heat of the existing fire begins to work upon the fresh fuel, and small tongues of yellow flame appear at the edges of the new lumps, tentative at first, then more confident, and the glow returns, deeper and richer than before, and the warmth intensifies, and the room seems to exhale with satisfaction, as if it has been fed and is content. The clerk replaces the shovel, brushes a trace of coal dust from his fingers onto the leg of his trousers, a habit so ingrained that he does not notice he does it, and returns to his stool. He settles himself, adjusts the angle of the ledger, and takes up the pen. The work continues. Outside, the mist has thickened further, pressing itself against the shuttered window like a soft grey animal seeking warmth. If the shutters were open, and the curtain drawn back, the clerk would see nothing of the yard beyond, only the white blankness of the mist, featureless and still, erasing the heaps of coal and the silent carts and the lean-to shelter as completely as if they had never existed. But the shutters are closed, and the curtain is drawn, and the mist is kept at bay, and the world of the office remains whole and self-contained, a small island of warmth and order floating in the vast, cold darkness of the November night. The entries in the daybook are beginning to thin now, the record of the day's business approaching its end. There are only a few more deliveries to transcribe, and then there will be the summary to complete, the column of figures to be added and the total to be entered at the bottom of the page, and then the day's accounts will be balanced, each penny accounted for, each transaction recorded, the whole of the day's work reduced to a few pages of neat, orderly figures in the leather-bound ledger. But the clerk does not hurry. He copies each entry with the same unhurried care that he has given to every entry that preceded it, the same deliberate dip of the pen, the same steady progress of the nib across the page, the same brief pauses to read ahead or to let the ink dry. The work is almost finished, but its pace does not change, because the pace was never set by the quantity of work remaining. It was set by something else entirely, by the nature of the work itself, by the temperament of the man performing it, by the quality of the silence and the warmth and the light in which it is performed. And so the pen moves, and the figures appear, and the page fills, and the fire glows, and the clock ticks, and the gas lamp casts its steady, golden light upon the desk and the ledger and the hand that holds the pen, and everything is as it should be, and nothing needs to change, and the evening folds itself around the small warm room like a garment of softest wool, and the world outside grows quieter and quieter and quieter still. The clerk pauses once more. He lifts his gaze from the ledger and looks, not at anything in particular, but into the middle distance of the room, that vague space between the desk and the far wall where the light of the gas bracket and the glow of the fire meet and mingle and produce a kind of amber twilight. His eyes are resting. The muscles of his hand are resting. Even his thoughts, such as they are, have come to a temporary stillness, like a stream that has reached a wide, shallow pool and has spread itself thin and slow and calm before gathering again to continue on its way. In this moment of stillness, the sounds of the room become more distinct. The clock, which has been ticking faithfully in the background all evening, seems to come forward slightly, its rhythm asserting itself in the absence of the pen scratching. Each tick is followed by its twin, a faint, almost imperceptible second sound, the echo of the mechanism within the case, so that the clock's voice, listened to closely, is not tick, 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 but something more like tick-tock, 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 a paired rhythm, steady and companionable, like the footsteps of someone walking beside you on a long, unhurried road. The fire, too, has its voice. It is not a single sound but a collection of very small sounds, each one distinct if the ear is patient enough to separate them. There is the soft, continuous sigh of the draught moving through the bars of the grate, a sound so low and so constant that it is more felt than heard, like the breathing of a sleeping animal. There is the occasional quiet click as a piece of coal shifts its position within the grate, settling fractionally lower as the portions beneath it are consumed. And there is, every now and again, a tiny, sharp snap, barely louder than the breaking of a thread, as a hairline fracture opens in the surface of a lump of coal, releasing a momentary jet of gas that flares for an instant in a thread of blue flame and then is gone. These are the small, intimate sounds of a room at rest, and they are, in their way, as beautiful as any music, not because they are melodious or harmonious in any conventional sense, but because they are honest. They ask nothing. They mean nothing beyond themselves. They are simply the sounds of things being what they are: coal burning, a clock measuring, a gas flame consuming its fuel, and in their simplicity they offer a kind of companionship that is both undemanding and complete. The clerk blinks slowly, returns his attention to the ledger, and takes up the pen once more. He has 3 more entries to complete, and then the summary, and then he will be finished. But there is no sense of anticipation in this knowledge, no eagerness to reach the end. The finishing is merely a part of the work, and it will arrive in its own time, as inevitably and as gently as the falling of a leaf from a branch that has held it all autumn long. He dips the nib. He writes. The next entry records a delivery of 1 ton of the household grade to a Mrs. Pearson of Albert Terrace, who is a widow of modest means and who pays for her coal in fortnightly installments. The clerk writes her name with the same care he gives to every name, the letters forming themselves beneath the nib with a precision that seems, in this quiet hour, almost tender, as if the act of writing a person's name in a ledger is itself a small acknowledgment of their existence, a way of saying, "You are here, you are counted, you are part of the record of this day." The quantity is entered, the price, the amount due, the amount received, and the balance, which in Mrs. Pearson's case is a small sum, carried forward to the next fortnight, and the entry is complete, and the pen moves on. The next entry is a delivery to a baker's shop on Mill Lane, 12 hundredweight of a harder grade used for the baking ovens, and after that a final entry for a small quantity delivered to the office of a solicitor on the High Street, a regular customer who orders his coal by the quarter and whose account is always settled promptly and in full. The clerk copies these entries with the same measured pace, the pen travelling across the page in its steady, unhurried progress, and when the last figure has been set down he pauses, looks over what he has written, and allows himself a small, barely perceptible nod of satisfaction. The entries are done. The day's business has been faithfully recorded, each transaction in its proper place, each figure clear and legible, each column aligned. What remains now is the sum. The clerk turns his attention to the column of figures that runs down the right-hand side of the page, the amounts due from each customer, and he begins to add them together. He does not use an abacus or any mechanical device. He adds the figures in his head, working slowly down the column, holding the running total in that private space behind his eyes where numbers live. It is a faculty he has developed over many years of practice, this ability to hold and manipulate figures mentally, and it operates now with the smoothness and the reliability of a well-maintained machine. The numbers accumulate, shillings joining shillings and pence joining pence, with the occasional carrying of a figure from one denomination to the next, 12 pence becoming a shilling, 20 shillings becoming a pound, the old currency with its familiar, slightly cumbersome arithmetic that is nevertheless, to those who have grown up with it, as natural as breathing. He reaches the bottom of the column and writes the total in the space provided, checking it once by running his eye back up the column and confirming, in a swift, practiced glance, that the figure feels right. Then he moves to the next column, the amount received, and performs the same operation, and then to the final column, the balances, and adds those as well. The three totals are set down in their respective places, and the clerk draws a neat double line beneath each one, signifying that the column is closed and the sum is final. Now comes the balancing. The total amount due must equal the sum of the amounts received and the balances outstanding. The clerk performs this check without writing anything further, simply comparing the three figures in his mind, and finds that they agree, as he knew they would, because he has taken care with every entry and every figure, and because errors, in his experience, are the children of haste and inattention, and he has been neither hasty nor inattentive tonight. He sets down the pen. He sprinkles sand upon the final entries, tilts the page, waits, brushes the sand away, and then, with a gesture that has about it something almost ceremonial, he closes the ledger. The heavy covers come together with a soft, leathery sound, and the clerk places both hands flat upon the closed book for a moment, as if feeling the weight and the substance of the work it contains, and then he removes his hands and sits back upon his stool. The work is done. The day's accounts are balanced, and the ledger is complete, and there is nothing more that needs to be written or calculated or recorded until tomorrow morning, when the new day's business will begin and the cycle will start again. But the clerk does not immediately rise from his stool. He does not reach for his hat or his scarf or prepare to leave. Instead, he remains where he is, seated at the high desk in the quiet room, and he allows the stillness of the completed work to settle around him like the warmth from the fire. It is a particular kind of stillness, this, the stillness that follows the accomplishment of a task done well and without hurry. It is not the stillness of idleness, which can sometimes carry with it a faint unease, a sense of something left undone or something waiting to be started. It is, rather, the stillness of completion of a circuit closed, and it carries with it a quiet satisfaction that asks for nothing and needs nothing and is sufficient unto itself. The fire has found its rhythm now. The fresh coals that the clerk fed into the grate some time ago have caught fully and are burning with a deep, even glow that fills the lower half of the fireplace with a radiance that seems almost solid, as if the light itself has weight and substance. The upper portions of the grate are darker, where the coal has not yet reached the full intensity of its burning, and above the fire, in the throat of the chimney, there is a shimmer of heated air, visible as a faint distortion, like the trembling of water seen through glass. The warmth from the fire is at its fullest now, permeating every inch of the room, and the clerk feels it upon his face and his hands and through the fabric of his waistcoat, a gentle, pervasive heat that seems to soften the very air he breathes. He sits and he looks at the fire, and his thoughts, released from the discipline of the ledger, begin to drift. They do not drift toward anything in particular. They do not settle upon worries or plans or memories. They simply move, slowly and without direction, like leaves floating on the surface of a pond, carried this way and that by currents so gentle they can barely be felt. He thinks, perhaps, of the warmth. He thinks of the color of the coals. He thinks of the way the firelight moves upon the ceiling, a slow, fluid dance of light and shadow that has no fixed pattern and no end. And then he does not think at all, or rather his thinking becomes so quiet and so formless that it ceases to be thinking in any ordinary sense and becomes simply a kind of awareness, a presence in the room, a being here that asks for nothing more than to go on being here, in this warm and quiet place, for as long as the evening lasts. The gas lamp above the desk continues to burn with its steady, hissing flame. Its light, which was necessary for the close work of the ledger, now serves a gentler purpose, illuminating the room with a soft amber glow that complements the deeper, ruddier light of the fire. The two sources of illumination together produce a quality of light that is quite unlike anything that natural daylight could offer, a quality that is simultaneously warm and intimate and slightly mysterious, that softens edges and deepens shadows and gives to every object in the room a kind of inner luminance, as if each thing, the desk, the shelves, the clock, the coal scuttle, the rug upon the floor, were lit not only from without but also from within. In this light, the ledger upon the desk seems almost to glow, its leather cover absorbing and reflecting the amber tones of the gas and the fire, and the brass fittings of the inkstand gleam with a soft, buttery luster that is both warm and restful to the eye. Even the coal dust that lingers in the air and upon every surface, that fine, almost invisible particulate that is the perpetual atmosphere of a coal merchant's office, seems, in this light, not grimy or unwelcome but rather like a fine veil of gauze that has been drawn across the room to soften everything it touches, to blur the hard lines and sharp angles of the workaday world into something gentler, something more dreamlike, something closer to the landscape of sleep. Outside, the November night presses on. The mist has settled into every hollow and every corner of the yard, and the heaps of coal that by day stand tall and distinct against the sky have become indistinguishable from the darkness that surrounds them, black shapes in a black world, their outlines dissolved by the moisture-laden air. The cobblestones of the yard, which during the day ring beneath the iron shoes of the cart horses and echo with the tread of heavy boots, are silent now, dampened by the mist, and the only water that moves upon them is the thin film of condensation that has formed on every cold surface and that gleams faintly when the light from the office window, escaping through the narrow gap between the curtain and the window frame, falls upon it. The stable, at the far end of the yard, is dark and quiet. The horses that work the coal carts during the day are asleep in their stalls, standing or lying in the straw, their great bodies warm and still, their breathing slow and deep. They are good, patient animals, heavy horses of the draught breed, accustomed to the weight of loaded carts and the long climbs of London's hills. During the working day they stand in their harness for many hours, wearing their blinkers and their nose bags, waiting with the uncomplaining patience that is the particular gift of horses while the coalmen load and unload and carry and deliver. But now they rest, and their rest is as deep and as complete as only the rest of an animal that has worked hard all day can be, a rest that involves every muscle and every bone and every fiber of their being, a rest that is not merely the absence of work but the active, living opposite of it, a state of profound and utter repose. The clerk, still seated at his desk, cannot see the stable or the horses or the yard. He can see only the room in which he sits, and the fire, and the objects that surround him, and the closed ledger beneath his hands. But he is aware, in a general and comfortable way, of the world beyond the shuttered window, aware that the mist is out there and the darkness and the cold, and that here, in this small room, he is sheltered from all of it, enclosed in a bubble of warmth and light and order that feels, at this late hour, as secure and as self-sufficient as a ship at sea. He rises from the stool. The movement is slow and unhurried, the careful unfolding of a body that has been still for some time and is in no rush to be otherwise. He stands for a moment, stretching his back gently, pressing his hands against the small of his spine and leaning backwards slightly, feeling the pleasant pull of muscles that have been held in one position and are grateful for the change. Then he moves the stool back from the desk, pushing it with his foot rather than lifting it, and the legs of the stool scrape softly against the floorboards with a sound that is absorbed almost instantly by the silence of the room. He walks to the fireplace, not because the fire needs tending, it is burning well, the fresh coals settled into their long, steady glow, but because the fireplace has a natural gravity that draws a person toward it, especially on a cold evening, and standing before it, feeling the warmth upon his face and his outstretched hands, is one of the small, unremarkable pleasures of the working day that he has come to value. The cast iron surround is warm to the touch, not hot enough to be uncomfortable but warm enough to be deeply pleasant, and the clerk rests one hand upon it, feeling the heat travel through his palm and along his fingers, and he looks down into the bed of coals and watches the slow, pulsing glow that lies at the heart of the fire. There is a world within the fire, a tiny, luminous landscape of ridges and valleys and glowing plains, that changes so slowly it is almost impossible to see the change happening, and yet is never the same from one moment to the next. The coals have formed themselves, through the accidents of their burning, into a miniature geography, a terrain of red and orange and deep, dark amber, with crevices of brighter intensity where the air reaches the fuel most directly, and darker areas where ash has gathered like snow in the hollows of a hillside. It is the kind of thing that can be watched for a long time without boredom, because it is never quite finished, never quite resolved, always in the process of becoming something slightly different from what it was a moment ago. The clerk watches. His mind is very quiet now, almost empty, a vessel that has poured out the last of its contents and is resting. The numbers and the names and the figures that filled it during the evening's work have all found their places in the ledger and have left his thoughts, and what remains is simply this: the warmth of the fire, the glow of the coals, the quiet of the room, the softness of the light, and a gentle, diffuse sense of well-being that has no particular cause and no particular object and asks for nothing in return. After a time, he moves away from the fireplace and crosses the room to the cabinet against the far wall. He opens one of the drawers and takes out a clean cloth, a square of soft cotton, and with this cloth he begins, very slowly and very quietly, to wipe down the surface of the desk. It is a task that does not need to be done tonight. The desk is no dirtier than it usually is. But the clerk performs this small act of tidying as a way of bringing the evening to a close, a way of putting the room to rest, as one might smooth the covers of a bed before turning down the lamp. The cloth moves in slow, circular motions across the leather surface, collecting the fine dust that has settled during the day, and the clerk turns the cloth and folds it and continues, methodically, until the entire surface has been attended to. He wipes the brass of the inkstand as well, polishing it lightly with the cloth so that it gleams a little more brightly in the gaslight. He straightens the pencils in their tray, though they scarcely need straightening. He closes the daybook and places it in its proper position beside the ledger, aligning the two volumes so that their edges are parallel, and then he stands back and looks at the desk with the quiet approval of a man who takes satisfaction in the orderliness of his working space. The room is very still. The fire burns. The clock ticks. The gas lamp hisses. The mist presses gently against the shutters. And the clerk stands in the center of the room, the cloth hanging from one hand, and he breathes, slowly and deeply, and the air he breathes is warm and faintly scented with coal and ink and the dry, papery smell of the old ledgers on their shelves. He folds the cloth and returns it to the drawer. Then he moves to the window, though he does not open the shutters or draw back the curtain. He simply stands near the window for a moment, and through the layered barriers of glass and wooden cloth he can feel, very faintly, the cold of the night beyond, a coolness that presses against the warmth of the room like the back of a hand pressed against a warm cheek. It is a reassuring sensation, this awareness of the cold that cannot reach him, this knowledge that the room has done its work and has kept the night at bay, and he stands there for a long moment, feeling the boundary between warm and cold, between inside and outside, between the small, lit world of the office and the vast, dark, misty world of the November night. A sound reaches him through the shutters, very faint, very far away. It is the sound of cart wheels on cobblestones, somewhere in the distant streets, the last delivery cart of the evening making its way home through the mist. The sound is muffled almost to silence by the distance and the mist and the shutters and the curtain, so that it arrives at the clerk's ear not as a distinct noise but as a suggestion of noise, a faint rumble that rises and falls and rises again and then, gradually, like a stone sinking into deep water, subsides and is gone. The cart has turned a corner, or has reached its destination, or has simply passed beyond the range of hearing, and the silence it leaves behind is somehow fuller and deeper for its passing, as if the brief intrusion of sound has reminded the room of its own quietness and has caused it to draw that quietness more closely about itself. The clerk turns from the window. He moves back to the fireplace and stands before it once more, and this time he takes the poker from the companion set that stands upon the hearth, a set of fire irons in blackened steel with brass handles, and he gives the coals a gentle stir. This is not an aggressive or forceful action. He does not thrust the poker deep into the fire or break the coals apart. He merely nudges the topmost layer, encouraging the pieces to settle more closely together, closing the gaps through which the heat escapes too quickly, and compacting the fire into a tighter, more efficient mass that will burn slowly and steadily for the remainder of the evening. A few small sparks rise from the disturbed coals and float upward into the dark throat of the chimney, glowing briefly like tiny stars before winking out, and a fresh wave of warmth rolls outward from the grate as the rearranged coals find their new positions and begin to burn with renewed vigor. He replaces the poker. He stands. He looks around the room, taking in, with a single slow glance, the entirety of the space, the desk with its neatly arranged tools, the shelves with their row of ledgers, the cabinet, the scales, the rug, the clock, the mantelpiece with its clay pipe and tobacco tin, the gas bracket with its steady flame, and the fire, always the fire, the warm, glowing heart of the room around which everything else is arranged. It is all in order. It is all as it should be. It is all quiet. The ledgers upon the shelves deserve a moment's attention, for they are, in their way, the most important objects in the room, more important even than the fire or the desk or the lamp. They are the memory of the business, the written record of every transaction that has passed through this office over the years, every load of coal that has been weighed and priced and sold and delivered, every customer who has placed an order, every payment that has been made and every debt that has been carried forward. The oldest of them, standing at the far left of the lowest shelf, dates from the year the present merchant's father opened the business, more than 30 years ago, and its pages, if consulted, would reveal prices that seem almost impossibly low by the standards of the present day, and names that have long since passed from the memory of the living, but the clerk does not consult the old ledgers. He merely looks at them, at their spines with their faded gilt lettering, and feels, in a vague and comfortable way, the weight of continuity that they represent, the sense that the work he has done tonight is part of something larger and longer than a single evening, that the figures he has entered in the current ledger will take their place alongside the figures of all the evenings that have preceded this one, and will be followed, in due course, by the figures of all the evenings yet to come, and that together they form a record, not dramatic or remarkable, but honest and complete, of a small business doing its necessary work in a corner of a town in the heart of England. There is comfort in this thought. There is comfort in the thought of continuity, of repetition, of the same work done in the same way in the same room, evening after evening, season after season, year after year. It is the comfort of routine, which is sometimes spoken of dismissively, as if it were the enemy of adventure and discovery, but which is in truth one of the deepest and most sustaining of human pleasures, the pleasure of knowing what is to come, of trusting in the pattern, of resting in the certainty that tomorrow will be, in its essentials, very much like today. The clerk does not articulate these thoughts. He does not form them into words or examine them with the analytical part of his mind. They are simply present, like the warmth of the fire, like the ticking of the clock, like the smell of coal dust in the air, part of the fabric of the evening, part of the texture of this quiet hour. He moves to the mantelpiece and takes down the clay pipe that rests there. It is not his pipe, it belongs to the merchant, but the merchant has given him leave to smoke it on evenings when the work requires a late hour, and the clerk, who is not by nature a frequent smoker, beneath the grate, in the ash-pan, a fine powder of grey-white ash has accumulated, the residue of the evening's burning, and this ash, too, has its own kind of beauty, a beauty of exhaustion and completion, the beauty of a thing that has given everything it had to give and now rests, utterly spent, in a state of perfect and irrevocable repose. The clerk draws on his pipe and exhales, and the smoke mingles with the warmth, and the warmth carries it upward, and it vanishes. There is a thought that comes to him now, or rather a feeling that takes the form of a thought, which is that this room, this small, ordinary, unremarkable room with its desk and its shelves and its fire and its shuttered window, is one of the finest places in the world. He would not say this aloud. He would not even, perhaps, recognize it as a thought if asked. But the feeling is there, deep and quiet and certain, the feeling that here, in this room, surrounded by the tools of his work and the products of his labor, enclosed in warmth and softened by light and held in silence, he is exactly where he should be, and that being where one should be is a kind of happiness that needs no other name. The pipe has gone out. The tobacco has burned down to a thin layer of grey ash in the bottom of the bowl, and the clerk taps it gently against the palm of his hand, collecting the ash and tipping it into the fireplace, where it falls upon the coals and is instantly consumed. He replaces the pipe upon the mantelpiece, in precisely the spot from which he took it, and he wipes his hand upon his trouser leg and turns back to the room. The clock ticks. The fire glows. The gas lamp hisses its tiny, continuous note. And the clerk stands in the gentle intersection of these three sounds and these two lights, the amber of the gas and the deeper gold of the fire, and he breathes the warm air and feels the peace of the room settle upon him like a mantle of the softest cloth, and he is still. A very long time seems to pass, though the clock, if consulted, would reveal that it has been only a few minutes. Time in this room, at this hour, has become elastic, stretching and compressing in ways that bear no relation to the mechanical divisions of the clock. A moment of watching the fire can contain within it a vastness that an hour of busy work cannot equal, and the minutes that the clerk has spent standing by the hearth, smoking his pipe and looking at the coals and listening to the silence, have each been as full and as complete as a day. But now, very gently, very slowly, the clerk begins to prepare the room for the night. It is not a complex process. There are no great tasks to perform, no elaborate shutting down of machinery or securing of premises. The room requires only a few small attentions before it can be left asleep, and the clerk performs these attentions with the same quiet, methodical care that he brings to everything he does. He moves first to the desk and opens a small drawer in its side, a shallow drawer lined with green baize, in which he keeps the spare nibs for his pen. He checks that the nibs are there, not because there is any reason to think they would not be, but because checking is part of the routine, and the routine is what gives shape and meaning to the work. The nibs are there, 5 of them, each one wrapped in a small square of oiled paper, and the clerk closes the drawer and moves on. He checks that the inkwell is capped, and it is. He checks that the daybook and the ledger are in their proper positions upon the desk, and they are. He picks up the small brass tray that holds the pencils and moves it fractionally to the left, so that it sits exactly in the center of the space allotted to it, and this tiny adjustment, invisible to anyone but the clerk himself, gives him a satisfaction that is entirely out of proportion to its significance, and that is, for that very reason, one of the purest satisfactions he knows. He looks at the shelves, at the row of ledgers standing in their chronological order, and he runs his finger along the spines, very lightly, not reading the dates but simply touching them, feeling the leather beneath his fingertip, slightly rough where the gold lettering has been impressed into the surface. It is a gesture of farewell, or of good night, the kind of gesture one might make in passing a hand along the back of a sleeping child's head, and it is performed with the same tenderness and the same absence of thought. He moves to the gas bracket and reaches up to the small brass tap that controls the flow of gas. He does not turn it off yet. He will do that last, just before he leaves, so that the room may remain lit for as long as he is in it. But he rests his fingers upon the tap for a moment, feeling the smooth, cool metal, and he looks at the frosted globe of the lamp and the flame within it, the small, hissing, persistent flame that has illuminated his work all evening, and he feels toward it a moment of something that is almost gratitude, though he would not call it that. He returns to the fireplace. The fire will be left to burn itself out overnight, as it always is. By morning it will have reduced itself to a pan of fine grey ash with perhaps a few stubborn embers still glowing at its center, and the first task of the morning will be to rake it out and lay a new fire and light it, and the cycle will begin again. But for now the fire is still burning, still giving out its warmth and its light, and the clerk stands before it and holds out his hands, palms downward, as if receiving a benediction, and the warmth rises up to meet his hands and passes through them and along his arms and into his body, and he holds this warmth for a long moment, absorbing it, storing it, taking it with him into the cold that waits outside. He turns down the gas. The flame within the frosted globe diminishes, gutters, and goes out, and the room, which a moment ago was lit by 2 sources, is now lit by one alone. The firelight, freed from the competition of the gas lamp, asserts itself more strongly, throwing longer and deeper shadows across the walls and ceiling, and the room, in this diminished light, seems smaller and warmer and more intimate than before, a cave of amber light in which the objects on the desk and the shelves are reduced to dark, suggestion-like shapes, their details hidden, their outlines softened by shadow. The clerk stands in this firelit room and looks around him one last time. The ledger, the desk, the clock, the shelves, the coal scuttle, the rug, the shuttered window, the faint, mineral smell of coal dust, the ticking of the clock, the glow of the fire. Everything is in its place. Everything is at rest. The day's work is done, and the night silence has claimed the room, and there is nothing left to do but leave, and locking the door behind him, step out into the cold and the mist and make his way home through the